All right, we're back, and it's COMP123. We're lesson 9, part 4. And, we're going to talk about a little bit of UI. We just kind of talked about some code snippets and shortcuts in part 3. And let's try this out. So this is a new application we're going to build. So this is a new way we're going to do this that we haven't done before. All right, so let's try this out together. So new, project. When we go to new project, typically we go into console application. Well, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to go to Windows Forms application. So let's pick that one. Follow me here, guys, because there's some little new stuff. Windows Forms application. Okay, this is cool. We're going to make our new file. It's going to be called the same thing, though, COMP123. And we're going to say lesson 9, part 3, right? Because part 3 is where we're at. And now we're doing Windows Form application. When I click OK this time, you're going to see slightly different options. All right, so I click OK, and then bam, I got this kind of graphical user interface here going on. Right? Okay, before I continue, of course, I'm going to create my GitHub stuff so you understand where we're going. And we will create a little GitHub repository called COMP123 lesson 9 part 3. Create repository, grab it and go into home, changes. And look, I've got all this extra stuff here now. Created Visual Studio C# Windows Form project, right? Okay, commit, and we're going to go to home and unsync commits and publish. Okay, cool. So we got this Windows Form application. Well, there's a couple things we're missing here. So if you only see this, right, this thing here, is this all you see when you come up with a Windows Form? Or do you see other stuff? Well, we're missing a couple of windows here to help us create stuff, right? Like, for example, on the left-hand side, you see that I have this little data source window docked. If I open it up, this is cool, but I don't need data sources right now. What I really need, and I'm just going to hide this up again, I need another window for my tool set, my tool, kind of almost like a toolbox, right? And how do you look at other windows? How do I find other windows in Windows Forms? I go View. If I go to Toolbox, right, which is Control-W, X. That's another way to bring it up, or just click Toolbox. It brings up my toolbox, right? So these are my toolbox, and I want to pin this thing here, or unpin it. So we'll go back to pin it. I want to pin it on here when I'm using Windows Forms, because you really need this little toolbox. Okay, so again, I did that with, I went to View, and then I went to Toolbox to launch that up. Okay, I want this to be on your left-hand side when we do Windows Forms from now on. Okay, I still need this, a Solution Explorer, and all that stuff on the right-hand side, but we're going to see we're going to have some less room here. We're not going to have as much room as we had before. So I'm going to kind of pull this over for now on the side. Okay, things to note, actually, before we do that. Things to note, on the right-hand side, you see this, a couple of new application, or different objects here. I've got my program.cs file. Let's take a look at that. All right, so if I was to, I'm just going to unpin this for a second and hide it. Okay, so here's I'm just hiding it. My program.cs file looks a little different than what we've been used to. There's a couple extra things here. Well, let's take a look. I still got my generic, collections generic. I still got this link, right? I still got threading tasks. But now I have this new insert, this new import called Windows Forms. Right, so I need that one now, okay? And also I have a couple of new things here. I have this static class program, and my static class program in my main, I actually call, first of all, I do a couple things. I say application, enable visual styles. This is all done for us, by the way. We don't have to do any of this. And then another thing is set compatible text rendering default false. Application run. This is important, this line here, application run, new form 1. Well, what is this new form 1 class that we're doing? Well, this is form right here, right? So see on the right-hand side? That means that the first form that's running in our application is this form right here, form 1. Form 1 is completely non-descriptive though, right? It's a real ugly name for a form, form 1, right? So that's okay, we'll change that later on. But you don't want to change it manually. You want to change this using refactoring, right? And the way we do that, of course, is you right-click on the form. Let's just do this here. And if I go rename, I rename my form to something else. Like let's say, for example, I call it first form, right? And I press enter, right? And it says, hey, you are renaming a file. Would you like also to perform a rename in this project of all references to the code element form 1? Definitely say 100% yes. If you say no here, you're going to mess up, all right? So say yes. When I do that, of course, now it says first form in here. This is an important note because, again, this application run, it indicates which form to run first, right? Because, for example, I can have a multi-form application, more than one form, and you want to kind of point out which form is running first, and this is what's happening here in our program. By the way, for our program files, this is one of the only times we're going to go into this thing when we do Windows forms. We don't touch this very often at all. Why? Because we have everything we need right here. We're instantiating a new form right here called first form. Okay, this is an important thing to note. So we actually have a new object, right? It's an anonymous object that we're passing into this application run method. So it's running the application by basically passing in an anonymous object of the type first form, which we just defined over here. Let's look at this first form application, right? If I go back to first form, if you notice it's been renamed, right? Well, if I right click on the top here, right, I have a couple of options. I can save, whatever. I can, do all these different things here, right? I can also, if I double click on the actual form itself, let's do that. Let's double click on the form somewhere. It takes me to code view, right? So there's two views for the form, right? Let me save this thing for a second. So it takes me to, to code view. And if you notice, there's a couple of different views here. I don't need my program form anymore, so or my program.cs. I'm just going to close this out, right? And if I look at my first form, it's just a class that it's created. But look at this new word here. We've never seen this partial word here, partial class. Well, in C#, what we allows you to do is you can create partials, right? And we're not going to go too much into this. I'm not going to talk about this again, right? Because this is kind of an advanced topic. But think about us declaring a class in piece parts. I want a piece of the class I've defined over here, and I've kind of defined a piece of the class somewhere else, but together inside the document somewhere, they come together to make one class on compile time. That's really what we're doing here, right? And the reason why we do that is because when we render Windows forms, there's a piece of the puzzle, a piece of our forms that's created by the system. Our classes are created half by the system, right? And they're stored somewhere where you can't touch them, right? And that's why it's called a partial, right? So leave it alone. Don't change this public partial class. And if you notice, when we have the colon, it means we're inheriting from, or this form, my first form extends the form class, which is our base form class that all forms inherit from. Okay, this is basic inheritance in classes and stuff. A couple things not to touch. Here's another one. Inside so we have our first form. What's this? It's a constructor, right? So this is what our constructor looks like. You can put all kinds of commenting here, and we won't kill anything. So here's our constructor, right? And if you notice, our constructor is automatically created for us when we create our form, when we create a project. It's an empty constructor, and it calls this initialize component method, right? But this initialize component method is inherited from our form superclass, right? That's one thing to note. And the other thing is, when I double clicked on this thing, I got this first form load method that just kind of created itself as a stub. Don't delete this method. This would be bad for you to do, right? Okay, and the reason for that, I'm just going to delete it now. So I'm going to delete this method to show you what I'm talking about. I don't like this first form method, so I'm going to be smart programmer, and I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to save my document now, okay? And I'm going to go back into my forms, because I want to see my form, right? I want to see my first form, and I get this error. Hey, what happened? I can't see my form designer anymore, because it says the designer cannot process unknown name firstform.load at line 40, right? The code within the method initialize component is generated by the designer and should not be manually modified. right? Why? Because what's happened is, and it says, hey, go to the code. If I go to my code, it shows me my design document. This is my design document. So there's several documents in behind making a form. Form designer is actually almost like a document that kind of describes my form. And all the controls that I'm going to throw down on my form, like I'm going to drag and drop some controls in a second, they're handled by another document that you normally don't touch, which is called form design. All right? So you see how I deleted that manually? I deleted a method because I thought I don't need that method, right? Well, you can't do that. When you have a method in here, and I'm going to go back to my first form.cs, here's where the method is that I deleted. If I put it back, right, and I control save, right, and I go back to form designer, right, now I got my form back. Why? Because my form designer, there's three parts to the form. My backend code, right, the design piece, and then the first form designer.cs. There's three pieces, right? Remember we talked about partial classes? Take a look at what this says. Here's a partial class, first form. My partial is made up of this form designer plus my first form.cs as another partial. Here's another partial right here. So these are two partial pieces of classes. And this is something new. We're not going to talk about too much about this after this. But just know that you have these two pieces, and this piece on the designer.cs piece for any form indicates what is on the form. And in this example, I have something called this.load, right, which is a new event handler that I put onto my form, and it's looking for this.firstForm_load. So if I don't have this in here and it's looking for it, it's going to cause an error and my form won't show up. So if you see that error again, let me show you that error again, because I'm being smart as a designer. I'm like, hey, I don't need this. And I just kind of get rid of it, right? Because I think I'm smart. I don't need that piece. I want to clean up my code a little bit. And I save, and I go to my first form, man, I'm going to get this error. We don't want you to get this error. If you get this error, some people go, oh man, I got to start a new project. I don't know what to do, right? You did this is because you messed up. You erased something you're not supposed to erase in Windows Forms. Because Windows Forms have multiple pieces to the puzzle, all right? So play nice. Do what I'm telling you to do, and you won't have these issues. If you don't play nice and you try and be smart and try and figure things out like that on your own, you're going to have problems, right? And when I mean that, I'm just being facetious when I'm talking. Again, to fix that, I'm going to go back to first form and undo my deletion, and here it is. How do I get rid of this anyway? I don't want this thing here. I don't have a first form load method that I need to use right now. Well, again, let's take a look at the form itself. If I click on the form, follow me here, guys, all right? If I click on this form right here, on the right side, I see my Solutions Explorer here, right? Well, I don't need this as much now as I need my properties. I'm going to bring my properties way up. Let's take a look at that. On the right-hand side, you have properties. We never used this before because we were making a console application. But now we're making a Windows Form application. Let's take a look here, right? So if you notice, here's my Windows Form, right? And on the right-hand side, I have all these freaking properties, right? Here we go. And if you notice, my name of my form, this is very important here. My name of my form is first form. That's the actual name that I'm going to use. When it says name in brackets here, that is the name of the form that I can reference as an object, right? That's the first thing. There's some other things we're going to cover in a second. I'm going to just keep looking down here, right, for other things, okay? And there's a lot of different options here, if you notice. Colors, icons, you know, all this kind of stuff. And if I keep scrolling down over here, I have this start position, right, which is Windows default location. And I have this text that says Form 1. Well, look at the top of my form here. My text on the top of my title bar, because every form that you create looks like any window that you've ever seen in Windows, right? You have a title bar, you have an X for the closing, you have a maximize and minimize button, and you have a little default icon. All right, you have all these little things on the form, right? If you notice on the text over here, it says Form 1. If I want to make this say my form, right, or first form, I just retype it over here. And now this will say first form. So all I'm doing is modifying my properties in here, and it's not programmatic. I'm doing it at design time. So we're going to talk about a couple of states, if you will, for forms. There's going to be the design time state, which is right now, okay? There's going to be the runtime state, which is where you can do stuff programmatically, where I can kind of program something and something will happen on the form, all right? We may not get to that, right? But we'll see how it goes, right? And so there's these two states, design time and run time. So right now we're in design time. Why? Because I've got the design up here. I've also got my first form designer. I'm just going to close that off. I'm going to save everything here. I'm going to close it off, right? And I'm not going to touch it ever again because you'll mess up right now. I just need these two states, first form and first form CS.design. So I want to get rid of this event handler. And you guys don't know really, we haven't talked event handlers at all, but I want to get rid of it. How do I do that? And I don't see it in here in my load. Well, what about at the top? There's actually a few extra things here. There's data bindings. Got some data bindings here. And I also have some application settings, right? So I've got a bunch of different things up here that kind of show me all these different things, right? Okay, cool. And if you look through it, right, there's different things you can modify. For example, let's look at this. If I run this form the way it is right now, what do I get? So if I take my run, before we would run, it would be a console application. Let's run it together. I'm going to click Start. If I start it up, I get this. Bam, I got my little Windows form. Whew. Okay? First form we've ever made. Right? I can resize it. I can minimize it. Right? And I can close it. And when I close it, my application closes. My debugging stops. Okay, let's try that again. So again, all I did was I have my form. What if I reformat? What if I change my size here in design time? So I'm in design time. I want to change my size of my form. I want to make it a little bigger. My window's going to be this big. And then I'm going to press Start. Will it start that big? Absolutely. When you change it, it changes. Well, what are you actually doing when you're changing the size? Well, over here on the right-hand side, if I look at the form again, I've got all these different options for my form, right? So if you look down here, if you look at, scroll down, I can actually, I can put my size, here's my size right here on the side. I don't know if you can see it on the right-hand side, but I actually have a width and a height value, right? I can change these things to be exact. So let's say I want to make a form that's 500 by 500. Let's change my form. Look how it resizes automatically. 500 by 500. Now it's 500 by 500 exactly, right? I can't move this form around because this is in design time. My design view always starts my form in the top left corner of my screen, okay? But if you notice down here on the right-hand side, right, you've got this 500 by 500. I should set up my values down here to do that. Here's another thing. My start position is another thing you want to think about for the form itself, right? My start position starts off at this place called Windows Default Location. Well, I have a pull-down menu that I can choose, and I have several options. I have Manual, Center Screen, Window Default Bounds, my Center Parent, all these things on the right-hand side. I'm sorry I can't show you better, but it's on the right-hand side here where you see these different options, right? So right now it's Default Location. Let's put it to Center Screen. Okay, so that's another option for my window. Center Screen. If I run this thing now with Center Screen, now it starts in the middle of my screen, right? Which is actually where I want my menus, all my windows to start, right? So from now on, let's look at this. If I give you an assignment, hint, hint, which I will, and I want you to start stuff off, chances are I'm going to ask you to start your window off in Center Screen, like this, right? Because it makes more sense. Okay, cool. Let's look at some other options here for the window. Let's leave these things alone. All right, I'm just going to go back up here. There's another little button. There's some few buttons here on the properties. I've got this button here, which is alphabetical. I've got another button here, which shows properties. And then I got another one over here that shows events. If I click on events, I get a different menu option here. And this, my friends, is where you take this thing off. Here's my load event. I just click this little lightning bolt up here on the top. Right, see the lightning bolt? That lightning bolt so here's properties, events, right? I want to go to the lightning bolt for events. And for now, I want to get rid of my first form load, which happens to appear here right now. This is the proper way to get rid of it. You go to events, and you just wipe this out. You just go, oh, not that way, and delete. And then click away, click away, click away. You're good because you didn't double click on your form like I did, right? And then if you look back in the first form.cs, I have to save everything. If I save everything now, I still have it there, right? Hey, it's still there, first form.cs. Why? Because even though I got rid of my event handler on this side, my firstform.cs load, this method doesn't disappear. I can manually take it away now by just deleting it, but my first thing I need to do is get rid of my event. Now if I go back to my Windows Form Designer, it's still there and my event's gone. So the order of getting rid of some weird event or something that you don't want in the form code is check to see in the lightning bolt if you have some kind of event that you put there by accident. Okay? Get rid of it here and then delete it from here. Don't do this first because in the form designer, it'll kind of hold it in play. Let's go back. We're not going to touch events for now. Let's go back to properties, which is this button here. Properties is the third button in from the left. So we have this button here, which is categorized, this button here, which is alphabetical, which I want to keep it on for now, this button here, which is properties, and then I have events. I want to go back to properties. Okay, cool. I got a lot of little properties I can mess with, man. Tons of little properties. I can change the font. I can allow drag and drop. We'll talk about that sometime later. I can auto size. Right now, auto size is false. I don't want that to happen. I got my background color. Let's change that background color. I don't like that control background color. Let's make it something, you know, sexy, like blue, right? Let's make the blue background, huh? Here's a blue background color for my form. I like this blue. Okay, I don't like the blue, but I want to put it blue anyway, just because, you know, I want to tell you. You have a lot of control here. So think about your form as a big control. It has like a lot of different things you can modify, and all the properties are here. You won't see the changes here because this is your code base. This is your code for the form. This form itself here, right? Everything that was done here is actually being recorded on the design side. Let's take a look at this document one more time. So if you look, here's first form and here's my program.cs. If I click this little arrow here, it shows me this first form is actually a combination of 3 different documents. I have my first form designer, if I click on that, which is something you don't want to touch. Okay, this is my first form designer. If you notice again, it's a partial class. Leave it alone. And if you look at this thing, and if I uncollapse this little area here, these are all my controls or all my options. Like for example, here's my start position is equal to system.windows.form start position.center screen. That's a long, you know, method. We don't have to touch this. We do this automatically when we configure stuff. I'll make this a little larger for you. All this stuff here, we don't touch on form design. We do this all in design time by messing with the form and changing its properties. Okay? Let's get rid of that. So that's one document to look at. So one document is this first form designer. We don't touch the designer document. There's another one, firstform.resx. Let's take a look at that one. This is like almost like what looks like our form, right? But if I look through it, it gives us all the resources for the form. And right now, we want to leave this thing alone. Leave this one alone too. Don't touch it. Then there's actually the first form document itself that has my classes and objects, and which is actually my code. So if I want to switch between my form up here and this form, the code version down here, you click these 2 things. You don't double click on the form like I did, because then it'll create an event that you don't want. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Questions so far? Straightforward? Okay, let's go on this journey together. Making Windows forms is like creating any UI. If you're programming UIs for a phone, if you're using Android, iOS, whatever you want to use, making form controls here. By the way, Visual Studio is one of the nicest form controller makers in the industry. All right, better than Android, better than iOS, in my opinion. It's easier to make, and the reason why is because it's all drag and drop, baby. Okay, let's take a look at that. So my first form, we've messed my first form a little, made it blue. Let's turn it back to the way it was. All right, so I'm going to go back up here. And again, how do I do that? I click on my form. Every time, any place I click gives me a context-sensitive properties options on the right-hand side, right? So again, if I would go back to the right-hand side, I got a couple things. I changed this 500 by 500. I changed my center screen. I changed my name to first form. And I also changed my ugly background color to blue, which is highlight. I want to change this back, right? Or something else. Let's say control light. Let's do control light. Here's a lighter version of my form. All right, let's do a couple more changes. If you look, let's go one by one. I don't have an accept button yet, so I'm not going to change anything there. Auto scroll which we'll call margin. I've got a couple things here we're not going to touch. Auto size is false. I'm going to keep going down. I've got my background image. I don't have a background image, but I could definitely put one in if I wanted to. I don't have a cancel button. I don't have a causes validation. I don't have any of these things right now. I have a control box. What's this? If I control box and I make this false, what happens to my form? Bam, it takes away my control box. I can't minimize, maximize, or close my form anymore, right? Let's run this thing and see what happens. Let's see how it looks. Oh man, I can't do anything. I can't maximize. I don't have the ability. I just have a control. Sometimes this is good if you want to make a modal form, that you want to make your own custom buttons, right? Sometimes this is a good reason why you want to take the control box away, right? But you can still, if I right click onto it, I can't do anything. But if I go down here, I can still close the window, right? Like I normally can do. You can also press stop. So control box, you know what, for now, let's keep it on, right? But we don't need to use it all the time. Here's our cursor. We can also change our cursor when we hover over the form. Right now it's the default cursor, but I can also choose a custom cursor. Like for example, if I want to use this weight cursor, I want to use my weight cursor. So when I'm on the form now, I change my cursor to the weight cursor, and when I hover over my form, bam, I get this weight cursor going on, right? It's automatic. Like there's nothing for me to do. I'm not doing anything crazy, right? Let's change this weight cursor back because that's kind of weird. And we can go to default, back to default. And again, I can just choose the default form. Sometimes you want to change the cursor for controls. By the way, again, we're looking at controls today, right? So this is the stuff we're doing here on the form. We're going to do in all controls. Every control has these options, but different options. Because every control has slightly different things. Now, think about what these things are. I'm modifying an object. My object is the form. All these things that I'm changing are properties. Imagine a class with a million properties, not just like, you know, the little classes we made. So our form class has like, let's say at least, I don't know, 20, 30 properties here that we can modify, that are visible to us, that are public, that I can change, right? And then I have private properties that I can't touch, right? Private instance variables and stuff like that going on in the background of the form, right? But right now, all of these things we can modify here. It's all sensitive to what I click, but these are all properties in my form designer right here, this design view, if you will, that allow me to change the properties of my of my form class. This form object we've created called, and I've named this first form, right? My form object is actually called first form. Okay, so we've done that. Let's keep going. Double buffered. Let's leave that false. Enabled. If I click this false, let's click this enabled false for now. Okay, and I run this thing. My form is disabled now. Okay, can I do anything with it? I can't. Actually, if I disable my form, any control that's in my form is not working. Right now, there's no control, so I don't see a visible change. I can move it around and all that kind of stuff, and I can still resize it, right, and all that kind of stuff, but I can't, if there was controls in there, I wouldn't be able to use them. Right now, let's put this to true, enabled. My font is my default font for anything that's inside of my form, right? Foreground color is the font text, the text color, right? And if you notice, there's a section here. I'm just going to open this up a little wider for you guys to see. If you notice, there's this little plus button. This little plus button here actually opens up it conceals all this extra stuff for this font section, right? So name, size, blah, whatever. You can change the font for your form, right? And here's my fore color, which is the text color, and so on. I also control the form icon. The icon is this top left corner of the form, right? So I can actually use my own icon. Now it's got to be the right size, and there's ways of creating icons, form icons. And again, if you're really interested in doing that, you can look up Microsoft MSDN, and they'll explain to you the right size for the icons. Usually they're like 16 by 16 pixels. We'll talk about that later on. Is MIDI container, right? Let's leave that alone. Key preview, let's leave that at false. Language is the default, English, but you can actually specify other languages, right? Other languages, like if you want to do Greek, you can make the form Greek if you want. It's up to you, right? As long as your system supports that, it'll work. Location is your start location. And right now, my start location is 0, 0, which is the top left corner of my screen. But then I'm recentering it to the center of my screen. So let's leave that alone. You can actually specify a specific location, a custom location for your form. For now, let's leave that alone. Locked is equal to false. Main menu strip. I don't have a main menu strip right now. We can put one on later. Here's something that you can mess with though. a maximize box. What's a maximize box? This is our maximize box. So I can turn that off, right? So here's my maximize box. I can say I can go from true to false. When I do that, right, it's not going to be active anymore. If I run this form, right, I can't click on my maximize box anymore, right? It won't allow me to because I've disabled it. It's there, it shows, right? But my maximize box doesn't work. Let's put that back to true. Same thing for my maximize size. Right now, I can specify a specific size it maximizes to, so I don't have to make it so it takes up the whole screen. Same thing for minimize box. I can turn that off. My minimize size, how small it's going to get, as an example. The opacity of my form, if I want to make it transparent, I can choose that. I can make it so it's 50%. Right, here's 50% opacity. I'm just changing the value here. And if I do that and run my form now, right, then I see it's transparent. I can actually see through things, you know, through the form itself, right? So that's my opacity. I'm going to put that back to 100%. Okay, cool. Right to left, no. That means right to left is when I want to make my form layout right to left. Let's say for other countries and so on. I can show my icon. Right now, my show icon is true. Let me put that as false. And then it takes away my icon in the top left corner of my screen. Lots of control, if you notice, right? These are all things that each form has, right? My size, we talked about. My size grip style, my start position, my tag, my text, my topmost, my transparency key, my use weight cursor, right? And so on, and blah, blah, blah. Clear? So, you like it though? So the idea here is that my properties window, let's recap, okay? Again, when I create my form application, I'm going to get an initial form, and it's called Form 1. I want to rename this form to make it kind of like contextual to what I'm building, right? We're making a first form. That's why I made it first form, right? And here, as an example with my first form, I have, anytime I click on the actual form itself, I have to bring up my properties, and I can modify all of these properties that are context sensitive. Wherever I click, I have options to these properties on the right-hand side. And right now, I'm just clicking on the form, and I have these, these properties that I can mess with on the right-hand side, right? Things not to mess with. I don't want to delete events that are automatically generated here. We'll talk about what those are in a second, right? And I also don't want to mess with, if I look inside the form documents itself, I don't want to really touch for now, as beginners, we don't want to touch the designer view or the resx view. We don't want to touch those. We just want to look at two things, this view and this one here at the bottom that says first form. First form is the code. The top one, firstform.cs, right, is the actual view, this one. So these two views are the only views we need for now. Clear? Let's add a couple things to the form, and then we'll save this up. Okay, so I've got my toolbox on the left-hand side here. I'm going to just pin it for now because I need it. And if you notice, there's all Windows forms. I also have common controls. I'm going to open this common controls up. And if you notice, there's different things like buttons, pointers, and blah, blah, blah. What I want you to do is I want you to take a label, click a label on the left-hand side, and I want you to drag and drop it onto your form like this. Here's my label, and if you notice, I've got this little square. I'm going to put it somewhere on my form. If you notice, by the way, I've got these little smart guides that go over here. Tell me not to put it too close to the top left corner. Let's put it there. Here's my label. Here's my first label on the form. I've got a new control on the form. And let's take a look what I got here. On the right-hand side, right, I'm going to pull up my properties again so you can see. I'm going to kind of make this a little bit bigger, right? And I'm going to go all the way to the top. I've got my name of this label I just dropped in called Label 1. Is that a good name? No. Let's change this to Hello Label, right? So we're going to do capital H, Hello, Label. And I want you from now on, when we create controls, every control we create, I want you to put in the control, in the variable name, the identifier, I want you to put what type of control it is. Okay, so these are, we talked about some best practices, right? For us in this class, when we create a control, it has to have a context. I don't want you to just put form 1, form 2, button 2, label 1, label 2. It's got to have a reason for being, okay? I want you to make a name for the label that makes sense. In this case, I'm calling it Hello Label, right? What do we think I'm going to put here? Hello World? That's the first thing. So the label, the name of the object is up here, where it says name in brackets, Okay, if I scroll down all the way, I go down to the actual text of the label. Hey, guess what? The text would be the property of the label, the text property of my label. My label I've called hello label, right? Okay, so I'm going to change this from label 1 to guess what? Hello world with an exclamation mark. And let's see what happens if I go back here, click away. It becomes hello world, right? Pretty small though, right? I still have context on this thing. If I click away, by the way, if I click away from my label and click to my form, the form itself, my context changes. I don't want that. I want to click on my label to change my properties. I can't change the properties of my label if I'm clicked on my form or somewhere else. I got to click on the label to change it. Okay, cool. So let's go here and see where it says font. I'm going to skip down. It's all alphabetical. Go down to font. And under the font section, I'm going to make this a little bigger for you guys to see. Under the font section, I want you to change the font size to something like 20. Okay, here's my hello world, right? Okay, so I've actually programmatically or physically done it. I've changed it. Right now it's not bold. I want to make it bold, so I want to choose bold. It's a font size or font type style, if you will. I don't want to make it italicized, right? Or anything. And right now my Microsoft Sans Serif is the type of file or font I'm using. I want to change this thing up, so I'm going to go click this menu, this down arrow. You're going to have different options here, but what I want you to choose, and probably you have this, is Consolus, console font. Hello world, right? And that's cool, right? Now we put it in the top left corner, and that was cool. And let's see what happens when I run it. If I run this thing now, I get this. Hello world, right? This is my actual window now. I can maximize it, takes up my whole screen. I can restore it, I can minimize it, I can come up, to the regular view, and I've got this font, but you notice I can't do anything with it. I can't highlight my hello world. Hello world's like rendered as an object, right? So I can't like highlight this and do anything with it. Okay, hello world. Well, let's see what other things we can change on my font. This is again a label control. Okay, we got a label control, I've got my image. I can put an image behind it. I can align the image. I can choose the location exactly. Right now, my location is 1313. Look, on the left-hand side here. I'm going to bring it up so you can see. 1313. If I move this label around, let's say I want to move this label to the middle of my screen somewhere, right? Let's say I want to put it there, because I think that's about the middle. I let go, right? Then my location is 137, 185, right? It's approximately in the middle. Okay, I don't have any guides, if you notice, that help me out right now or anything. Okay, but it's in the middle of my screen. So I can put my label, I have absolute position control to put my label wherever I want within reason. If you notice these little smart guides that pop up on the right-hand side and the top, tells me that I shouldn't probably put it too close to the left margin or top margin right now. This is, if I wanted to, I could kind of make it come up here too if I want to, right? But then it would look like this. Right? And you probably wouldn't see half of it. Like some of it would be hidden. Right? I could also make it appear kind of half hidden like this. I could do that too. But then again, that's all you'd see. Right? That's ugly. Right? So you don't want that. Okay, let's bring this back into the middle. So we'll put it right smack in the middle. Okay, cool. Text align right now is top left, which means that's where our alignment happens. I'm just going to pull this up, just another option down here. And I have use compatible text renderer is false, and a bunch of other things. I can also make it visible. There's a visible property to this control, like all controls. And right now my visible property is true. If I make this thing false, if I change this thing from true to false, right? Even though I can see it here in design view, at runtime, if I click it, it's not there, right? Because I made my visible property false. So it's physically in the form, but it's not showing right now because the visible property is false. Okay, let's go put it back to true. So again, I'm clicking on the actual label control, going to visible. Instead of making it false, I make it true, right, as an example. And I don't change my text align or anything else. I'm going to kind of scroll up. Any questions around this thing, what I'm doing right here? It's kind of straightforward, right? I can change the text color and all that kind of stuff with underneath my font. If you look there, there's font colors and stuff I can change. right? For now, let's leave it as is, right? I can also make a maximum size and a minimum size, which sometimes we need to do if we're going to resize our form and so on. But for now, let's leave it as is. Okay, cool. I've got my label. Let's add a button, right? And this is where we're going to stop recording after this. So I'm going to get my button on my left where my toolbox is, and I'm going to drag and drop my button this time, and I'm going to try and align it. Oh, hey, look at the smart guide that comes up. My smart guide comes up, so I can align it with my label. Here's my button, right? And if I kind of go in the middle somewhere, if I go to the left, it kind of aligns the left side with my label, the right side of my label, and then if I go down, it still aligns the bottom of my form. It helps me out to understand if it's kind of centered. And I want to kind of put it in the middle like this, my button. Okay, my button. It says button 1. Is that the proper name for a button? No. I feel like I'm talking to my kid, right? No. My kid's name is Alexander. No, Alexander, it's not, right? It's not the proper. The reason I'm talking like this is because if you think that this is the right name for the button, you'll lose marks when we do an assignment. All right? I don't want you to name your buttons button 1, label 1, blah, blah, blah. These are bad things. Rename this thing. My button is going to be called my Click Me button. Click Me button, right? That's the actual name of the button. Okay, cool. And I'm not going to change the button style right now or anything like that. I'll leave it alone, right? But one thing I will change all the way at the bottom is this where it says my text value, my text property. I'm going to change it to, say, Click Me. Here's my Click Me button. So now if I run this thing, right, I get 2 controls. So I got my Hello control and my Click Me button. It's pretty small all the way, my Click Me. It doesn't do anything right now. I mean, it shows like a button. If I hover over it, it gives me these hover effects. These are all built-in stuff that you inherit from the button class. Hey, by the way, I just said something. Each control is a class, right, of its own, an object, if you will. And these objects live inside another object, the form object, right? So each object, then, each control is an object. Each control has properties of like an object would have, and methods, okay? Because they're classes, right? They're objects that are made of the button class, as an example. Okay, cool. I don't think my text is very big. I want to kind of match up my text of my button with my label. So let's do the same thing. So I'm going to go to font for my button. I'm going to change my font size, here. I'm going to manually change it to 20. And I'm going to go with, instead of sans serif, I'm going to change my sans serif to Consolas just to match it up here, right? And again, you can make whatever font you want. Hey, what's wrong? How come my button, I can't see my button? Well, well, how come my label automatically sized? Right, well, that's what happens. Sometimes you automatically size, sometimes you don't. So if I can resize my button, I can do it so that way it fits what's inside of my, whatever the writing is. So I'm going to put my Click Me button kind of underneath my Hello World here, right? And I'm not going to mess with the button style right now. Let's leave it the way it is, like I said. Okay, cool. And now I'm going to run this thing. Let's see if it looks a little nicer. Yeah, it does. Right, here's my Click Me button. It actually works, right? Like in terms of if I can click onto it. It doesn't do anything right now. It's really big, eh? It's huge, right? I made a big button. Okay, so far so good. Now this is where it gets funky. So watch carefully. Remember I talked about how you can create events automatically, right? Well, I want to make my button work, right? So I'm going to double click on the button control like this. Watch. Click, click. All of a sudden, I'm just going to unpin this for a second so you guys can see better. It takes me into code view, right? This is our code view. This is design view. This is code view. Code view. Hey, look, I got this new event. It's a method. Click button, click me button dot click. And it has a couple of arguments. A sender object, right? And event args. Let's leave those alone right now. We're not going to touch those. But I got these code braces in here, right? How do I do something with my button? I click my button, and it made this event. We're going to talk about events in a second. And I want it to do something. Well, first of all, we have to understand what events are. Who knows what an event is? Who's programmed anything ever before? Yes, what's an event? I like the trigger word. It triggers something. So an event is something that occurs, right, that triggers a response. okay? It's actually a message that the system sends out, right? Now, there's two ways of dealing, actually two things we have to do when we want to have an event happen. One, we have to be able to listen for events, right? I'm pulling on my ear here. You guys can't see it on the video. But you have to listen for the events. So there's the actual listener portion, right? That's the first thing. Then there's the handler. So I'm listening for my event, and then I got to handle my event. I got to do something with it, right? Well, guess what? We're always listening for events, always. When we're running Windows forms, we're constantly listening for every event that's going on. As soon as I run my Windows form, I have a bunch of event listeners already built in that are running, okay? But I've got to define my handlers, right? And this is when I double click on a button, I'm actually defining a handler for the button click event. There's different kinds of events, right? This is a button click event that I'm responding, right? And if you look up here, by the way, on the top right corner of your screen, if you notice, there's a bunch of different kinds of events, right? We're not going to touch these right now, but they're listed up here, right? Okay, cool. Inside here, if I know that this is my handler, so when I click my button, this method here, this handler, allows me to do something when my button is clicked. This is the handler for the event click, my button click event, okay? If I put something in here, I want to modify my label. In my mind, I'm thinking if I click the button, my effect that I want to have on the label, I want to change the text of the label to say goodbye, right? Hello, goodbye, right? And how do I do that? Well, I got to do this. I need to know, first of all, what the label is called. I know what the label is called. I named it what? Hello world, or hello label, right? Right here. So I know that's the name I need to use. Okay, so here's my hello label. So I'm going to say hello. Hey, wait a minute, it's coming up, huh? It's coming up because I named it in my forms on the design side. I named my label correctly, so I know I can access it here. So here's my hello label. That's the first thing. I named it that way, right? And I'm going to say dot. And what do I want to access? These are just properties of my hello label object. Well, let's take a look what I want to change. I want to change my text property of my hello label object. It's right down here, and it's a capital T, text. Well, this is pretty simple. All I have to do is dot T for text, and if it's there, yes it is, I can change it to whatever I want. So I'm going to change it to, in brackets, goodbye. This should work, right? Theoretically. Well, yeah, because it's anything that's inside of a label or anything you take in from any control, input or output to the form, again, best practices, they're all strings, which means any kind of calculations we do, just like we do in our console, we have to convert them into actual integers. We can't just take something, an input from the user, and do something. So goodbye. Okay, cool. I'm going to save this thing, and I'm going to run my form now right from here. And if I click me, it changes to goodbye. Right? It's our first button, people. Huh? Aren't you happy? I'm happy, right? Now you've taken leaps and bounds, steps. Now you're beyond doing a console application anymore, right? We're not going to do those anymore, huh? Isn't it nice in here, huh? That's okay. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix all these things, and we'll talk about the centering and the niceties and making the form look nice later. Okay, but if you notice, I can't go back. I got my goodbye, right? Click me. Can't go back to hello. I want it to toggle. Okay, now some code comes into play. So every time I click this thing, right, my hello text, I have my form, and I want to kind of toggle it back and forth. Well, I don't have a label. I don't have some kind of option to toggle it, right? Can I not check to see if what my text is? Like can I check to see what my text shows? How do I do that? Well, let's see. Let's do a console out, right? So I'm going to go do one of these. I'm going to say console.WriteLine. Oh my God, I'm using console stuff? Right? Console.WriteLine, and I want to write down the hello world, hello label.text, right? We know how to do this. This is what's going out to the write line. Okay, this is good. And I need to have some kind of read key because it's going to go away, right? So what am I going to do? CR. Console.readKey. Because I just programmed that as a code snippet today, right? And my console.readKey is going to be here. So let's see if I click on I'm going to click on the label, I'm going to click on the button, and every time I click on the button, my console.readKey console is going to pop up, and it's going to show me what's inside the label. Okay, let's try that out. This is all inside my button event handler, my handler, which is called click me button underscore click. This underscore click is my event handler. Okay, let's run this again. Click me. Okay, oh man. Oh, hey, what happened? It says an unhandled exception of type system invalid operation exception occurred in la la la. Why? Well, because it says cannot read keys when either application does not have a console or when console input has been redirected from a file. Try console.read. Well, okay. What if I just took this out? If I just like took my console.read key out, right? Will the console still pop up? Let's run this thing and press continue. So click me. Oh, I don't see my console anywhere. Where the hell is it, right? I don't see my console down here. It's a package manager. Here's my error list down here. My locals. How do I see my console? It's gone, right? In fact, I don't see my console, right? I can't do a console.writeLine when I'm running Windows applications. Can't do it. Okay. Here's something we can do. Let's try something else though. We have other windows that are part of our debugging mechanism here on the Windows form, and I want to be able to print something out here. This, alert. I want to kind of show what I have in my text label somewhere else, right? I could store this back into a label. I can do that, right? But I need to be able to do some. I can't do the same kind of debugging that I used to do with my console if I don't have a console that's available to me because I'm running a Windows form. So let's take a look at the forms that I have options for, or the other windows that I have available to me, right? So I have my Solution Explorer, my class view, my code definition window, all these things. I'm looking at my view menu, by the way. Output, I got my output window, my task list, my toolbox, all these things. I got other windows. I got my command window, my data sources, my web browser, blah, blah, whatever. My layer, my source control, keep going down, package manager console, my browser, my pending changes, all these things. Go back to code analysis and code metrics. I don't see really what I have anything here that I can do. I can kind of pull up, in terms of windows. How about my debug? Well, Windows, I have my breakpoints, I have my output window, and I have an immediate window option. So what if I put when I'm in debug mode, I want to use my output and my immediate window. Maybe these things can help me out when I'm in debug mode. Okay, let's start this off again. So I'm running, here I am, and then now I'm in debug mode, right? Because if you notice, I have my locals down here, and I have my call stack on the right side, and I want to kind of go debug, Windows, and I want to use output. Here's my output right down here, right? Well, my output, it says show output from debug, right? And if you notice, I have a couple of things that prints out. It says all these other things, these little commands, COMP123, lesson 9, part 3, vshost.exe, it's running. Okay, and I also have options to do things like my build order, my debug, my build, my refactor, all this stuff down here, right? So debug, I have to maybe I can access my debug window, right, to kind of show what I'm getting, right, from my form. Let's go back. Can I do that? Can I go something like this? I'm going to stop debugging for a second. Can I do that and kind of type in something like a debug command, like debug? I can't do that. What a console.debug. Can I do that? No. I got to be able to output my things somehow. So my console.writeLine doesn't work, right? I can't do my debugging that way. But we're going to get back to how we do debugging. And I wanted to point it out to you because some people try and do this the first time and then they're like, I don't understand what's happening here, right? The other thing what we could do, we didn't talk about debugging at all in the first part of our lessons together, right? But the way, if I wanted to stop at a certain point, for example, if I say my hello labeled text is equal to goodbye, if you see this gray gutter here on the left-hand side of my code, by the way, you can do this in console applications as well. If I actually click on it here, right, I actually put together a stopping point. So I just clicked on my left margin over here. Hey, we're just doing debugging for the first time, right? If I run this thing now, right, And if you notice on the bottom left-hand side here, I've got my output window now with debugging. If I choose click me, right, it actually stops running my code and takes me to the debugger. Well, there's a couple things I can do. I can hover over different things. I can go, for example, I can hover over my hello label, and it says, it shows me the value. It says my hello label is an object, systems, Windows, forms label with a text value of hello world. Right? Here's another one. If I hover over the text property, it shows me the value of it, hello world. See? Me hovering. And I've done that by introducing a stop point. There's a couple of controls up here in my debugging window. Let me take a look here. Right at the top, I've got this other one that says show next statement. Another one that says step into, step over, step out, right? These controls up here on the top right corner of your screen are the debugging controls to step through your application. You're going to need to use these things when you're debugging your code, right? So if I go next, if I click this next button, it's going to run the next statement. If I skip over, step into, right, it's going to step into the next right line, step by step, right? If I go to the next one, if I keep stepping into, now I'm at the bottom of my code, and I can keep stepping one step at a time until my code stops. Now there's no more stopping point, so my window is actually up, and it's listing for me to type something. If I click on this again, it takes me right back here again. Why? Because my event triggered. Every time I click that button, this event handler, click me button.click, triggers, and I go right back to my stopping point. Okay, so if I know that's happening, this is how I'm going to toggle, or toggling means I'm going to change my text value from one value to the other. All right? I can't hold a variable here at this level inside of here, because every time I put a variable, if I define a variable here in this scope, every time I click the button, it's going to redefine that variable. So I can't hold it there. So the best place to hold it, of course, is here at the top of the form. So I can define some form variables here. Like, for example, I want to put in something that says, let's say, hello. I'm going to define a label. We'll make it a Boolean, right? Here's a bool. And I'm going to put in a value that says my hello label, we'll call it flag. Okay, hello label flag, big variable name, right? We'll set this value to false, right, at the beginning. And I'm going to stop debugging for a second. Okay, so here's this new value I've put in the form scope. This is the entire class, right? It's outside of this click me button handler. It's inside my form, and it's a global variable, if you will, that's available to my form, anything inside the form, right? So now what I want to do is, I'm going to take off this debugging. I can just click on and off for my debugging. If I want to have a stopping point, I can click on and off, right? So inside this hello flag, as an example, right, I want to basically test to see if this hello flag is on. And I can do it like this, right? So if, make a statement here, if my hello flag, hello label flag, here it is, right? If my hello label flag is equal to true, right? Then that means it's been clicked, right? I don't want that to happen, right? So that's fine. And then inside there, I'm going to say my hello label text, it's already been clicked. I want to switch it back to hello, right? My hello label text is now going to say hello world again, right? Hello world. Okay, let's get rid of this, because I'm never going to see this console. And then else, any other time, right? If it's not true, right, then I want to change it to goodbye. Okay, goodbye. Okay, cool, this is cool, but I'm missing something. My hello label flag will only work once if it's true. Well, right now it's false. So the only way I can make it to true is if I do this. If I say my hello label flag is equal to true down here, and then my hello label flag, when I click hello world, is equal to false up here. So all I'm doing is toggling, changing my value from true to false, and if it's true or false, I test it up here, and every time I click the button, it's going to change my label from goodbye to hello, goodbye to hello. over and over again. Do you understand that? So I'm using my Boolean. This Boolean it only can hold two things, true or false. I'm setting it false by default, right? And when I come and check this, when I click my button, it's going to trigger this event handler, right? This event handler is always going to trigger every time I click my button, right? And then in my hello label flag, I'm going to test to see if it's true. And if it's true, right, that means it's already been clicked, right? And I'm going to change it back to hello world. And then I'm going to say I'm going to set my hello label flag to false. So next time I click on this, it's going to not be true, and it's going to do the other option. That's all I'm doing, toggling from one option to the other. Let's try this out, see if it works. If I've got everything going, if I click me, and then every time I click, it's going to go hello, goodbye, hello, goodbye, hello, goodbye. Questions? I'm going to go back to for now, I'm going to go back to Team Explorer, right, and update this to GitHub. And we'll stop recording for now, take a little break, and then go back to some more stuff. So go to changes, and by the way, if you go to changes, if you notice, sometimes there's untracked files like this one, first form res. You want all these untracked files to go, or else there will be pieces of your application that won't be going to GitHub. So I'm going to say added button and a label to form, right? Commit, home, unsync commits, sync, and now you have what I have. Okay, we'll go back and we'll stop recording for now, and we'll come back after the break.